Hello students! In the last two videos, we talked about the structure of carbon and its versatile nature. Can you tell me why it is capable of forming bonds with almost all other elements? We can answer this if we know the structure of carbon atom. Since knowing structure of carbon is very important, let me revise it for you. We know that carbon's electronic configuration is 2,4 since it has 6 electrons and thus has 4 valence electrons. Now it has to gain either 4 electrons or lose 4 electrons in order to attain an octet and become stable. However, as we said, this is not as easy as it seems. This is because if carbon loses 4 electrons, it will be left with 2 electrons, but the number of protons is still same, that is 6. Thus it forms an atom with positive charge. But carbon needs a very large amount of energy in order to lose or set free these 4 valence electrons. It is because an atom has to overcome the strong force of attraction between protons in the nucleus and the electrons. Thus, losing 4 of them will create instability. So, it is very difficult for carbon to lose 4 electrons. Now, what about carbon gaining electrons? If carbon gains 4 electrons, it will now have an extra 4 electrons in its orbit. However, protons are still the same, 6. Thus, it forms an atom with a negative charge on it, or ion called as anion. But again, as we know, it is very difficult for a nucleus to attract 4 extra electrons and keep them in the orbit. Again, this is because carbon requires lot of energy to attract 4 extra electrons and keep them in orbit. And thus, the gain of electrons again will create instability. Therefore, carbon cannot gain or lose electrons and consequently cannot form ionic bonds. This problem of carbon becoming stable is solved by sharing of valence electrons by one carbon with other atoms. Yes, sharing, and this is called covalent bond. In addition, not only carbon but also many other elements form covalent bonds by sharing electrons. But how? Let us know. As we talked about the atoms of carbon and many other elements form bonds by sharing electrons. The pair of shared electrons is called a covalent pair of electrons, and the bond that is formed between this pair is called the covalent bond. Observe this diagram. It shows covalent bond formation between two atoms. It is called as electron dot structure or Lewis structure. It shows how covalent bonds are formed between atoms. Here, the valence electrons of atoms are represented as points or crosses around the atomic symbol of that element. Something like this. Now, to show bond formation between these hydrogen atoms and carbon atoms in methane molecule, we draw circles like this. Since we use dots to show valence and shared electrons for these atoms, it is called as Lewis dot structure. Now let us take a simple compound like methane to find out how carbon forms a covalent bond. One of the most common compounds formed by carbon is methane, CH4. As is clear from its molecular formula, here one carbon atom is bonded with 4 other hydrogen atoms. This is the hydrogen atom. As you can see, it has only one electron which is represented in its first k orbit. It is also the valence orbit for hydrogen, which has one valence electron. Similarly, for carbon, we know it has total of 6 electrons, arranged as 2 electrons in K and remaining 4 electrons in L orbit. Therefore, carbon has 4 valence electrons in its orbit. Now, hydrogen needs one more electron to become stable, and carbon needs another 4 electrons to complete its octet and become stable. Can you now think of how both the atoms can become stable here? Let me give you a hint. Consider one carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms here. Could you guess the type of bond they form? Correct. They form covalent bonds. Here, this carbon shares its 1 electron with 1 electron of hydrogen. So, how many hydrogens are required to share 4 electrons of carbon? Yes, 4. Isn't it amazing that one carbon atom shares its 4 electrons with 4 different hydrogen atoms? And adding more to it, it will be more amazing for you to know that this shared pair of electrons belong to both atoms. So these 4 shared electrons of all hydrogens will belong to carbon, and thus carbon will have 4 of itself and 4 of hydrogen, which makes total of 8 electrons. And same is true for hydrogen as well. Each hydrogen will now have 2 electrons with them. Therefore, carbon and all 4 hydrogen atoms now have fully satisfied valence orbit and have become stable. Thus, the carbon atom forms 4 single covalent bonds with 4 different hydrogen atoms, and vice versa. 4 hydrogen atoms form 4 single covalent bonds with 1 carbon atom. Such compounds with covalent bonds are called covalent compounds. Now the question is, every time, can covalent bond be formed between 2 different elements? Can 2 atoms of same element form covalent bond? We will see other examples of such type of covalent bonds in our next video.